Good evening, Wednesday night Bible class. Good to see y'all. Appreciate Lucian mentioning that Denise and I are grandparents for the third time as of last night. Beautiful young lady weighing 7 pounds, 19 inches long. And tomorrow I won't remember any of that. I don't even know my own children. But we're very excited to have her, and we hope to be able to. We haven't seen her yet. We're going to see her tomorrow before we have to journey up into the hills of Tennessee tomorrow evening. But very grateful to be with you as we continue our lesson of biblical MythConceptions. And last Wednesday night we talked about Noah, the ark and things about that, and animals that went on. But we also talked about the mark of Cain, right? And we're done talking with it, except I still think about what Jeremy said about it. It's still weighing on me, Jeremy. I'm still looking at it. But I had the Warrens come up to me at the end of the class with big smiles on their face. And they finally had figured out what the symbol was that was the mark of Cain. I hadn't thought about it. So just to give y'all equal time as well with their solution, I thought I'd share it with you. The mark of Cain. I don't know how they kept straight faces the whole time thinking about this. It just makes me think of one story, though. Back around 2007, Denise and I became what they call chapter directors of the Gold Wing Road Riders Association here in Rome. So those who rode Gold Wing motorcycles. And we were directors because the day that we showed up for a meeting, not knowing they existed, they were shutting down because nobody would be a director. And so I said, well, just give us a little time, see if we could get it. But just to tell you a long story, we took over the job, and you go from place to place in Georgia. There's a statewide association, a nationwide, and we would go down to Winder, Georgia. We would go down to Marietta and all these other places and meet, and sometimes we'd go out of state. And when we would show up, because the club, that's not a club, the chapter was considered practically dead, nobody knew that we existed. And our name was Chapter L. They used letters. And so we went to the point that they would say, who are you guys? Well, we're Chapter L. Oh, you're the loser guys, aren't you? So this became our symbol. I didn't know I was doing the mark of Cain at the time, that when we would introduce ourselves, we would be Chapter L. To make a long story short, even though that we were on the bottom of the list, 1 year later, the state of Georgia actually recognized Chapter L as the number one chapter in the state of Georgia. We were like the Atlanta Braves. We went from worst to first like they did back in the 90s. But anyway, I wanted to share that with you, and I appreciate the Warrens sharing that with me. We went over several questions last week and only covered 2. And I still don't know why that shows up funny. But in this, here we go. We got the first 2. The next one would be spare the rod, and we said spoil the child, right? God moves in mysterious ways. Money is the root of all, right? And in Revelation, one who opposes or denies Christ is called an Antichrist. And who rules over hell? Ooh. Very good. I heard a different answer. And I think somebody's been studying. Yeah, we say Satan. But I will pose this. We're not going to hit this subject tonight. I'm looking at maybe doing an entire lesson on it. But you might be surprised who rules over hell after we get done with that study. But enough said on that. Want to go on and get into this. We said spare the rod and spoil the child. I've heard that ever since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. People talking about that. And we know it. We know what it means. And we say, well, that's where it comes from, the good book. The Bible tells us to do that. But this is what the Bible actually says. Whoever spares the rod hates their children. But the one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. That's in Proverbs 13. It's close, but it's not the same in what it's saying. I believe in the result is actually there, but the Bible doesn't say spare the rod, spoil the child. It actually says spare the rod, hates the child, which is even worse. There's more depth to that in dealing with that. As a matter of fact, some of you would remember, back in the 60s, there was a pediatrician that began to write books on how parents should be taking care of their children. His name was, when I first heard it, I thought Star Trek was getting popular, and it was Dr. Spock, but this was Dr. Benjamin Spock. He actually started writing books in the late 50s, but he got popular in the 60s and in the 70s. And his way of parenting was a little different than what people had been doing in the past. Your child misbehaves, you discipline the child. You spank the child. You do something to let the child know that his behavior is not acceptable and that behavior needs to change. Back then, again, it was normally a spanking or a good talking to. Today, they would call the spanking corporal punishment, would they not, from that? But we just said we're getting a spanking from that standpoint. Now, I was one of 5 children in my family. And I know that my parents believed in loving their children, and I believe they loved us all. By what they did, they did without that we might have. We didn't realize that when we were young, but as we got older, we realized that our parents were doing without, so that all of us kids could at least have some things. But my parents, even though they loved me, they believed in discipline. So, as 5 kids would be, and we were stair steps, every even year we were born. Mama started having us at 15. She got married at 14. So young bride. And by the time she was 23, she had 5 children. People couldn't imagine that today. We grew up very close. Matter of fact, we grew up with our mother, right? She didn't have much of a teenage life. She was a mother very young. But there were times that we had to be punished, disciplined, as we might say, a kinder word. We knew that when we stepped out of line, that we were deserving of something to show us that we had stepped out of line and be corrected. We didn't question it. We knew that what we had done was wrong, and we knew there were repercussions to that. So the next time it came around, and one of the siblings said, "Hey, why don't we do this?" No, last time Mom and Dad told us not to do it, and we did it. We know what happened to us. And I don't know about you, Mama would make us get our own switch. And if you didn't get the right switch, you had to go back out and hunt a little bit more. Daddy, he didn't believe in any of that. He was more direct. That's the way we guys are, right? We're very direct. We're not going to make you get the switch. I'm just going to take my belt off. And I'm going to have you down. But Daddy used psychology. Now, I've told you my degree was in psychology. But somehow Daddy got some psychology without even having to go to college. I think he finished the 9th grade. But we'd have a couch, and being little kids, we were all skinny back then. All 5 of us could sit on the couch. And when it came time that we had done something, like the time we knocked a hole in the sheetrock wall about this big, and Daddy came home from work and Mama explained what had done, Daddy set us down on that couch. And he took his belt off. And again, for some people, that would be horrible. But he gave that first person a lick with that belt. Then he'd go to the next one with the belt. And then the next one would get a lick and go down the row. And he would repeat that process maybe 3 times. But the thing is, you weren't getting 3 licks. You were getting 15. Because when you were sitting down that row, every time one of your siblings got a lick, you felt it. That's the psychology that was in it. So he didn't have to spank us as many times as Mama, as far as the number of repetitions, but neither did he have to spank us as often as Mama. Why? Because we would push Mama as far as we could, but we know you couldn't push Daddy too far. And so we knew that one punishment from Dad, well, that was worth a lot more than several of Mama's. And so we could take a few of those. And we all grew up to be terrible people, because of the spankings, right? Now, I have siblings we're very, very close today, and we realize that the discipline that we were given helped mold us. It helped make us who we were. We knew there were certain things, places where we were safe, and certain places where we were wrong. And so when we begin to look at the scriptures here in this about hating the children rather than just spoiling them, we realize that we do a great injustice if we fail as parents and as grandparents. It's harder for grandparents to discipline our children. And I remember seeing on shows that when someone was getting ready to be spanked, but back then they allowed that on the shows in the 60s, and the parent getting ready to do the spanking would say this, and you may have heard it: "This is going to hurt me a whole lot more than it's going to hurt you." And we go, "What? If that be true, why don't you just take the spanking for us?" We didn't understand it until we became parents ourselves and understand it. It's something that must be done. And the scriptures here, or the Proverbs is saying that there's discipline that has to be done. It's not going to be easy. But if you love your child, you will do what you have to do. And that is the interesting thing. And there's some other verses that go along with this verse 13:24. In Proverbs 23:13, it says, "Do not withhold discipline from a child." This is further explanation, is it not? "If you punish them with a rod, they will not die." And I know sometimes I thought I was going to die, that from that standpoint. Today, the disciplinary process is totally different, is it not? I don't know if anybody spanks their kids much anymore. And one of the reasons is when I graduated from college with my degree in psychology and sociology, I went to work for the Department of Human Services for the state of Tennessee. That's kind of what you would call DFACS today, but we call it Department of Human Services, and there was one division that was called Protective Services. Now, we weren't policemen. We weren't authorized to carry a weapon, but I would go in and investigate homes where there was referrals of child abuse and or child neglect. And I saw things that I didn't think it was. So I grew up in a loving home. Yes, my parents disciplined me. They cared enough to discipline me, but they made sure that I was taken care of and I was loved. But I soon found out as a young person out of college that there were more homes than I thought there would have been in my home county where the parents had no love for the children and they treated them as possessions rather than children, to the point that not only were cigarette burns on their skin, but sometimes it would lead, the worst one that I was ever was where a mother filled up a bathtub of water and put her 3-year-old child in that full bathtub and walked off. And did not come back till the child was floating in the water. I mean, just terrible things. And for many of us, we can't think, how can a parent not have that natural love for the children? Well, even back these centuries before, the Proverbs is telling us that's important that to show love for your children, that you must discipline, because not only do you want them to be healthy, you want them to function appropriately in the community, in society, in discipline. Now, when you went to school, most of us in here are definitely old enough, we had to mind and behave. We had to follow the instructions of the teacher, and if we acted up and for some reason, teachers back then, when I went to school, would spank you as well. Whether they spanked you or they did something to you. When you got home and told your parents, what would happen? You'd get in trouble again. They didn't pick up the phone and call the teacher and say, "How dare you discipline my child?" They would take up for the teacher because that they knew that they were the ones in authority and that you needed to do what they needed to do. And when you grew up and you went to work and you realized there are rules at work that you must go by, it was easy to do because you were used to being disciplined, to following those codes of requirements or whatever they might be. So in this case, this has far more ramifications than what one might think. And in verse 29 here, this last verse on the slide, a rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces its mother. And of course, the same would be say it disgraces its father as well. Because they do grow up to be spoiled, that they are the center of the universe. As 5 children, we realized not one of us was the center, but the family was important, and that was our refuge. And that in that family we could find safety and comfort, and that discipline was part of that. But in sparing the rod, even though we look at the rod as being something that as something that would measure out correcting, but the rod was also used for defending, for protecting, for guiding, and then, as we stated, in punishment. But the punishment ways of disciplining have changed in our culture over the years. It doesn't mean that it's any less effective. With our children, we didn't spank them as much as we were spanked. That was part of that cultural change, but we did spank them when we felt needed. But the worst thing that you could do, Tara is our oldest child, very bright, and she was pretty good most of the time, but every now and then she'd get to streak in her. She wasn't going to do what you said. And when we spanked her, she looked up at me when I was spanking her bottom, maybe 3 little pats. She looked up at me and like, Dad, if you think this is hurting me, then you got something else coming. And I go, this is totally ineffective. And Denise says, put her in a chair and make her face the wall. What's that going to do to her? We put her in a chair and she faced the wall. She just broke down. She could not stand sitting in a chair and looking at a wall. So whenever she needed to be disciplined, that was what we would use, saying, we're going to put you in the corner and make you stare at the wall. And she'd perk right up. It's amazing. What she responded to in the discipline was different. And so discipline doesn't have to be a physical rod. It's just simply a means by which we use to let them know that what they're doing wrong, and that what they're doing wrong will involve some discomfort, but that discomfort doesn't have to be from a switch or a belt. That discomfort can be just from doing something that makes you feel bad in that sense. But they learn from that and they go on. And it's hard cases in this case, but Benjamin Spock said, you need to stop disciplining your children. You need to just let them experience life. I'm paraphrasing rather largely. And so people started letting their kids do what they wanted to do, having more freedom. Now, Spock would come along later and say, you misinterpret what I was saying. I was just asking you to realize that different children respond to different stimuli. And there's definitely truth in that, as I mentioned about Tara. The boys, if you just looked at them cross-eyed, they'd straighten up from that standpoint. But people took this on to say, well, I'm not going to discipline my child anymore. And what did that lead into in generations yet to come? It's important to discipline. I believe that, yes, when we say that we hate the child, then it shows that we no longer care. But a parent will say, but I love my child. I can't discipline them. You've got to understand that with you withholding discipline, whatever that proper discipline is, by withholding that discipline, you are damaging the growth of that child. You are stunting the maturing of that child. And we would have children that were in homes that we were maybe under our care, where we put them back in the parents' care and watching after them. And we noticed that at times the children were getting into more trouble than what they had before. And you think, they're back with their parents. The parent seems to be doing good, but the child itself is doing worse. Well, we found out the child would go to the parent if it wanted to do something. The parent said, no, you can't do that. You just can't do that. And, well, I'm going to do it. Well, no, I'm going to take care of you if you do that. I'll discipline you. And the child would say, if you do anything to me, I'm going to tell the Department of Human Services that you beat me. And it would scare the parent into doing nothing and it propagating. But I just do want to make this one statement. What we did find in this thing where if you spare the rod, you hate the child, we found that parents who neglected their children, that those children grew up to neglect their children, who grew up to neglect their children. I know it doesn't make sense, but we saw that cycle, and that was one thing that was drilled into us as counselors to deal with. So this statement that was made in Proverbs goes much beyond than what many of you might think. It involves so much more. But overall, it's just saying that truly, if you love your child, if you love your child to the point that you want that child to be the best that that child can be, discipline is vital in their rearing, or as we would say in Tennessee, in their being raised up. You know, we raised up children, and then someone said, no, you don't raise up children, you raise up corn, you rear children. Well, in the hills of Tennessee, we raised children. That's what we did. So, understand that the failure to discipline can cause a child to have devastating consequences, not only for the child, but also for the parent. David's that should be S, David's sons. You know, Absalom and Amnon, 2 Samuel chapter 13 through 19. You know, Absalom was the third son of David? And David really, really, really admired Absalom. He admired him so much that he never disciplined him. And I assume he didn't do that to Amnon. But we find out about Absalom when he had a sister named Tamar. Amnon was his half-brother. And we know that Amnon got sickly in love over Tamar, right? He wanted her to be his wife. And he gets up a scheme where he pretends that he's sick. And he asks for Tamar to come and take care of him. When she does, well, he has his way with her. He rapes her. And a funny thing happens, and this goes back to the psychology of things. The scriptures say that he then hated her as deeply as he loved her, paraphrasing, because she was no longer the pure thing that he had looked up and held up and admired. Now, what did David do to Amnon? Nothing. But Absalom waited out. It was a period of time that went by, but he had a party, and then the next thing you know, he invited Amnon, and he had Amnon killed. What did David do to to Absalom for killing his son? Absalom's half-brother? Nothing. We know that Absalom took off, right? But even when he wound up coming back, David did nothing. He didn't even go to him at first. It was Joab, his general, that finally kind of got them together. But we see that David, of course, we know that he had multiple wives, and who knows how many children that he had. But he did not show them the discipline, the example of a good father. And so we see evil in Amnon in what he did, and then we see evil in Absalom in what he did. And other people could see it, but David couldn't. And when finally Absalom had proclaimed himself king in Hebrew, and Joab went and some other of David's generals went to push him out, you know, Absalom takes off, and his hair, got long hair, and it gets caught in tree limbs, and the horse pulls out from underneath him, leaves him hanging. Now you say, well, how that can be? As a person who rode horses as a teenager, that can happen if your hair is long enough. I've got tangled up in brush where the horse has gone into the woods with me. But Joab was given instructions by David, don't harm Absalom. And what did Joab do? You remember? Killed him. Because he said, he's a problem. He's uncontrollable. We've given him multiple chances. His dad is blind to it. His dad will not discipline him, so I'll just take care of it. Might have been one of the reasons why David told Solomon when he took over as king. He said, when you take over as king, you need to take out Joab. Interesting. So, with that said, this is just an example, truly, of a child spoiled, because in this case, we see that even though the scriptures don't say, spare the rod, spoil the child, it is an after effect of it. And then we go into God moves in a mysterious way. But first of all, just let me say, it's nowhere in the Bible. That's why there's no verse, because it's not found in the scriptures. But I'm telling you, this is probably one of the most often used quotes that people use to quote from the scriptures. You know, God moves in a mysterious way. When anything happens that we don't understand, or we don't like, or we think it looks bad, but we hope it's going to be good, the Lord moves in mysterious ways. And even though it is not, that phrase is not in the scriptures, it doesn't mean that the statement is not true. Can you think of ways in which the Lord has moved in mysterious ways? I can in my own life as I think about it. And just quickly, you know, when I went to David Lipscomb College, and some of you are old enough to know the Batzel Barrett Baxter. He was one of the pillars of the Church of Christ, right? He did the Herald of Truth. You could watch it every week. Well, he was one of my instructors. I was awed by it. I thought, whoa, you know. And when I graduated, even though my degree was in psychology and sociology, I was preaching at a small country congregation where my future wife would come to visit her grandmother, and that grandbrother would bring her to the church where this little 20-year-old boy was preaching. Hadn't been for that, I wouldn't have met my wife. But when I got out of college and got to working, I had a friend of mine, a teacher of a high school, said, listen, you know, we got this large congregation of the Lord's body. We want you to try out to be a youth minister. And I thought, well, that'd be great. And I went over there and tried out, and the tryout, and I think I said this up from top once, the tryout was not me speaking, it was me leading singing. And as I mentioned the other Sunday, I didn't do a very good job of it because I didn't get the job. They hired someone outside of my hometown. You know, a prophet is with honor except in his own country, right? And so I was a local boy, and they wanted somebody from outside who just happened to be a David Lipscomb graduate as well. Real good guy. But I realized if I had taken that job, would I be with my wife today? Would I be with you today? Would I have come down to Rome, Georgia, you know, being transferred by the company that I was working for, because that's how I made my living as I was preaching, and then one day have the ability to influence people on a daily basis as I eventually took over control of the company? Mysterious ways. I thought I was a failure, but overall I looked at God does move in mysterious ways, at least what I think. Now that's a personal experience, but can you think of examples in the Bible of moving in mysterious ways? I know that's very open-ended. While you're thinking, the only place that we find God moves in a mysterious way is in our songbook. And that was William Cowper in the 18th century wrote the song, God moves in a mysterious way, and we sing that sometimes from time to time. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footstep in the sea and rides upon the storm. Even when things are bad, the Lord is there, is what William Cowper is saying. And you can't judge what's going to happen just by the situation that you are in at the time. Yes? Well, I see it that way, Donna. That's me. That's just me. But I see that because if God is moving, his providence is part of that, right? I mean, it's his providence in that. And a lot of times we have things that occur in our life, and we say, I believe that to be the providence of God, right, in our lives. So yes, that's the way that I see it. If anybody else has any comment, speak up. But thank you, Donna, for speaking up. Yes, Jeremy. And yes, I mean, when someone says, well, I know what God wants you to do, none of us really know the mind of God. And as you pointed out, Jeremy pointed out, for those who listen to the live stream, he was quoting from Isaiah and says, say it again. Yeah, my thoughts are not your thoughts, and my ways are not your ways. So true. So we really don't fully understand the mind of God, or the plan of salvation would have been different for many of us, would it not? Why would I have to give up my child, my only child? Why couldn't I find a different way to do that, where that child does not have to suffer? But God knew that that's what had to be done. His mind is different. And just in giving some examples that I did, not a quote in the Bible, but Abraham and Isaac. When Abraham thought he was going to have to offer his son to God. Now, think about it. You had the God of the Ammonites that was abhorred because what did they do? They sacrificed children to their God. And here is God asking for a child sacrifice. It's very difficult. And we don't you wouldn't understand it. But yet we have the hindsight with us to go back and see that God was testing him for God knows all, but God is also letting Abraham prove to himself that you've got faith in me. You're willing to do whatever I ask you to do. So who would have thought about doing that? Definitely God moves in a mysterious way in that. Life of Joseph. Isn't that kind of the epitome of God moves in unexpected or unexplained ways? I mean, the favored son. Now, Joseph was probably spoiled, y'all, because he was the favored. He was given the coat of many colors. Jacob liked him the best. The brothers became envious. There wasn't 5 children. We had 12. We had a lot more children, 13. But with that said, the brothers became jealous, and we know what they did. They sold their brother into slavery, a horrible thing. And those people in turn sold Joseph into slavery, and he wound up being in the jail at Pharaoh's court in Egypt, right? Life was terrible. He'd done what God had asked him to do, and it was all going amiss. But we know he became the salvation of the Israelites when the famine came, right? They would have been starved out. And so we see that God truly moved in mysterious ways, that Joseph was elevated from this prisoner slave to being the second in command of Egypt. Not only did he save the Israelite nation, he saved Egypt from the famine. So it's more than just that. Again, God's providence and moves in a mysterious way. A young lad defeating Goliath. And I don't know how young David did this. I would have been horrified. As a grown man, I'm even more horrified thinking about it. And yet God wanted to say, it's not you, Israelites, it's me. And I can take a young boy and I can defeat the giant of the Philistines, which is what he did, right? Mysterious ways. This one, I think more and more about it. I originally just talked about how the Israelites took over Jericho. You know, they finally had stopped wandering in the wilderness. They had crossed over Jordan, and the first obstacle in the land of Canaan is this huge fortified city called Jericho. And I think, if I remember, Jeremy, you can help me, because I know you used to go into these statistics. But the wall was considered to be around 11 feet high and 14 feet wide. I may have that reversed. But you could drive a chariot on that wall if you wanted to. But that's how strong a fortification that city was. And yet, we know that the priests went around blowing 7 trumpets, right, every day. And the 7th day, they went around 7 times, right, and blew the trumpet and shouted. And the walls had fallen. And there's a lot that can be said about that. That's mysterious, y'all. It is. But what I find mysterious is that in the Jewish history, because the Jewish people will study this, right? Rahab and her family, God had said, you will spare her and her family. A prostitute. He didn't go after the most righteous person in Jericho. And I'm sure there were good people in Jericho who really didn't care what was going on. But God said, you'll spare Rahab and her family for what she's done in taking in the spies and hiding them when they first got into Jericho. Now, you fast forward and you've got all these different sects, the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Hellenistic people. But the Pharisees are the ones that Jesus seemed to hang on to, and he did say some things about the Sadducees. But the Pharisees, he seemed to call more hypocrites than any sect that I've read. And they were the ones that said, I'm going to do everything perfect. I'm going to live the law of Moses. I'm going to do all those 600 plus commandments or laws that we got so that the Messiah would come. And we're going to be devout and pure. And so if they saw someone, a prostitute on the street or someone that was a sinner in their mind, they'd have nothing to do with them. Oh, I don't want to be touched by you because you'll make me filthy. And yet, it was the prostitute that God used for the Israelites to make their first conquest in the land of Canaan. Have you thought about it? It's showing that God wanted all people were God's people. And just as we talked about Noah last week, everybody was great-great-great-grandchildren of Noah, were they not? And of course of Adam as well. So I find this interesting in this respect. Yeah. Yes. So even more so, right? As Jeremy was saying, that Rahab is mentioned in the lineage of Jesus. She's part of that lineage, which again shows us that Christ came for all. And Hitler destroyed Jews because he said, I want to keep the bloodline pure, and they're not pure. But the Jews looked upon themselves as being pure, and yet through their lineage, prostitute. Very good. I appreciate you bringing that up. I had that listed, but I had gone past it. Thank you, Jeremy, very much. All right, and then this last one that I have, deity sends his son to become flesh and offer himself for a sacrifice. God can do anything, and he could have just said, peace be still, right? Like Jesus did to the ocean. People be forgiven. But he didn't do it that way. And I can say, why not? It would have been easier. It would have been less painful for his son. I mean, think about it. Not just the death of the cross, but he had to put on flesh. He, the supernatural, had to come down and walk, that when he walked and his toe stubbed the stone, it hurt. He didn't know what pain was until he became a human being. And you go, would I have done it differently? But God wanted us to know. I mentioned this once in one of the Lord's Supper tables when I held. Going back to the parable of prodigal son, God wanted us to know that not only was he wanting us to come to him, but he was willing to come to us. Think about that. He wanted to say, even though I'm God, and the Jews said, God is so high above that we can't even get near him, so we're not even going to call him Jehovah. We're not going to call him Yahweh. We want him to use his name because we can't say it with enough reverence. That same one that they said that God is just too powerful, God is saying, no, I've come to you so that you can come to me. I mean, it's powerful. So that mysterious, that unexplained way was to show just how much, as John 3:16 says, that God loved us. When it says he loved the world, he was talking about the people, and so that is it. Just quickly, since the first bell has gone, the root of all evil, it's not money, right? It's the love of. Now, I'm not going to say any more about that because I plan on having a little section on wealth. Wealth. Is it evil? Antichrist, Ron Vick's not here. He did a class on Revelations. The word is never mentioned in the book of Revelations, Antichrist. You won't find it. And I did not know this till I started studying MythConceptions. If you asked me where it said Antichrist, I would have said Revelation. Nope. 1 John, same writer, but 1 John 2 says, little children, it is the last hour, and as you have heard that the Antichrist is coming, even now many Antichrists have come, by which we know that it is the last hour. 1 John 2:22 also talks about the Antichrist. There's a lot of things here, but in the interest of time, we'll go just understand this. You can go to John 2, 1 John 2, 1 John 4, and to see that indeed that the Antichrist is mentioned there. There's some allusions in some of the other books in the Bible, but this is the only place that you're going to find the phrase Antichrist. Whoop. But I will tell you, Mark 13:6 says, many will come in my name claiming, I am he. And this is part of that Antichrist. The person who claims that he's either Christ or he's totally against Christ. But usually an Antichrist was someone who professes, I am the Messiah. I'm here. And Jesus said, after me, there'll be many more that will come. And they will claim that they are the Messiah and that I was not. So it's just important to look at it. And one final word in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, and I don't have this put up, but in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, Paul talks about the man of lawlessness. And some people say, well, that's an Antichrist, but it's not mentioned as him being the Antichrist. And there's a study that you can do on what is this man of lawlessness, because Paul is just, he's telling the Thessalonians, you sold your homes because you think that the end of times is right up on us. But the man of lawlessness has to come first. Because some of the Christians had done just that, sold everything they had, said, I'm not going to need it. And now they were mooching off their brothers and sisters in Christ because they'd gotten rid of everything, and yet the Lord had not yet come on his second coming. Just another thing. But I'm going to go right past this because that's more things. But I wanted to see if I got this. I'm leaving you with a riddle. I will not be here next Wednesday night, even though Michael is sick and said that he misses us. He is planning on teaching my class next Wednesday night. We will be camping. I have to come back Monday for a PET scan, but then I'm going to go back up to the camping where I do with my siblings that I grew up with and love. And then a week after that, I think that's when they're going to start my radiation treatments. So what is more powerful than God, meaner than the devil? Poor people have it. Forget that has, I wrote it wrong. Rich people need it. And if you eat it, you will die. I want you to think about that. What is more powerful than God, meaner than the devil? Poor people have it. Rich people need it, and if you eat it, you will die. You know the answer, don't you? Good, you hold on to it to yourself right now. I want them to think about it, and, this is where you put on a pot of beans, and in the morning let them simmer all day. I'm throwing this riddle out. I always knew there'd be some smart person out there that would do this. Okay, all righty. But think about this, and when I come back in 2 weeks, I will divulge the answer unless you divulge the answer, and think about it. But it'll play into some of the lessons that I have. And we've run out of time, but we're going to be talking about meekness. We're going to be talking about oneness. We're going to be talking about, as I said, wealth. We're going to be talking about, trying to think about them all in my mind. Christian. Where did the name Christian come from? If you haven't studied it, you're going to be very surprised from that. And I look forward to that discussion. No, I'm going to speak on it for 30 minutes, so no, I don't want you to answer. Yeah, very good. All right, we got someone who knows more than I know, which is not saying much. I hate to say it, but no. Thank you for being smart enough to do these things. So that's it. Appreciate your attention. See you in a couple of weeks.